Well, hello there. Welcome back to the channel. My name is James, and here at 20th and 21st Movies, we are about all things cinema. Well, I am excited today to go through part 2 of my horror movie recommendation series. So in the first part of this series, which I put out the other day on this channel, I covered some classic horror movie recommendations. So these are films that are more than 10 years old. In this video, part 2, I'm going to talk about horror movie recommendations for contemporary or newer films. So contemporary films, meaning films that are within the last 10 years. So these are more recent titles. And as you can see here, I've got about a dozen or so films that I'm gonna walk through here that I'm really excited about sharing with you, and just, sharing a few thoughts on each, but just putting it out there as here are some recent horror titles that if you haven't seen, you might want to consider seeing. So without any further ado, let's jump right into it. It's Halloween season, it's October. Everybody wants to watch what are some great horror movies. So let's talk about a few. So the first one here that I'm going to talk about stars Natalie Portman and Oscar Isaac in a very recent film, and it came out in 2018. It's directed by Alex Garland. And this is called Annihilation, and this is from the same filmmaker and director of Ex Machina, which is an excellent film that also stars Oscar Isaac. This is a really nice film. This is Annihilation. It's like a science fiction type film. There's this zone in Florida that's almost like a Bermuda Triangle type zone that once people go in, they never come out. And Oscar Isaac's character, who is Natalie Portman's husband in this film, he went in and came out, and he's not quite the same. And so she, Natalie Portman, is leading an expedition into this zone to figure out what's going on in this mysterious place. It's just a really interesting sci-fi horror film that I highly recommend. If you haven't checked out 2018's Annihilation, definitely check this one out. Nice performance by Natalie Portman. Oscar Isaac is excellent in everything that he does. And this is just a really nice film if you haven't checked this one out. This is Annihilation, so check this one out. The next title is a title that I absolutely love. And this is a title that came out in 2017, I want to say, directed by Jordan Peele, one of the most exciting directors that I think is out there working today. And it is 2017's Get Out, starring Daniel Kaluuya. This is just an absolutely phenomenal film. It stars Daniel Kaluuya and Allison Williams here. And this is just a crazy, crazy film. It's basically Daniel Kaluuya and Allison Williams are an interracial couple. He's an African-American man. He's going to visit the family of Allison Williams and get introduced to her parents and get to know the family. And in the process of doing so, some very strange and creepy things happen. Right? There's a lot of racial undertones that are explored in this film, as well as horror undertones. And it's just a incredibly weird and crazy mash of those two things that make this film one of the best films that's come out in the last several years. This is just an incredible film from Jordan Peele, and it's just one of those films that you just have to see for yourself. I don't want to go into a lot of details. It's just one of those films that you want to go into and just walk in the shoes of Daniel Kaluuya's character as he tries to figure out what in the heck is going on with this family and this strange town and the strange behavior of the people in this area. So definitely check out Get Out. And this same director, Jordan Peele, in 2019, released another film called Us, starring Lupita Nyong'o, which is a very nice film. It's another horror film by him. It's not quite as good as Get Out, but it's a really nice film from Jordan Peele that I recommend. Get Out is a step above this film in my mind, but this is a very nice follow-up to that film. It's called Us, starring Lupita Nyong'o from Jordan Peele. And I am really excited that Jordan Peele is releasing another film in 2022 that's going to get some coverage on this channel, and it's called Nope. And that's coming out, I believe, in April of next year. So more to come on that exciting title from Jordan Peele. So the next film is a film that stars Brad Pitt, and who doesn't like a good zombie apocalypse film? And that's what you get in this 2013 film, World War Z. Now, this is directed by Mark Forster, stars Brad Pitt. He's a United Nations employee, and he is going around the world trying to save the world from this zombie apocalypse. This is a really interesting thrill ride of a movie that I highly recommend. If you want to just see a good zombie apocalypse film, a contemporary zombie type film, this is a good one. World War Z starring Brad Pitt. Really excellent film from Mark Forster. Check this one out. And then, of course, one of the classic horror movies of all time from 1978 is Halloween. And 40 years later, Jamie Lee Curtis comes back reprising her role in this film in 2018 called Halloween. So it's a film by David Gordon Green, and in this film, Jamie Lee Curtis reprises her role as Laurie Strode, and she comes back to face the demons of Michael Myers and face this horrible monster of a man who terrorized her nearly 4 decades earlier. So this is a really nice film from 2018. I really enjoyed this new Halloween film, and I'm looking forward to seeing Halloween Kills when it comes out in less than a couple weeks from the time that I'm recording this video. Is coming out on October the 15th. So definitely looking forward to watching that film. That brings us to the next title, which is a period piece from the 1600s. So it takes us to the 17th century and is The Witch. And this takes us back to the 1600s as a family in England deals with the supernatural forces of witchcraft and magic and all kinds of crazy horror type things. So I definitely recommend checking this one out. This is a really creepy, scary type film that has a really nice atmosphere and a nice horror vibe to it that I really appreciate. It says evil takes many forms. So definitely prepare yourself, embrace yourself when you watch this film. It's called The Witch, and it's from 2015. Another film that I would recommend bracing yourself for is actually a couple films, and this is the first part of it. Is called It. These are some young kids who are dealing with a very crazy and evil clown called Pennywise, and this is based off of the Stephen King novel of the same name, It. There's been many adaptations of Stephen King's novels through the years of this particular work, TV movies and other movies of this. This is the most recent version. It came out in 2017. It's directed by Andy Muschietti, and this is a really, really good film. It's the kind of film that, you know, I know a lot of people are scared by these types of movies, but when I look at these films, at these It movies, they make me laugh more than anything. They're just really fun movies to watch from a horror standpoint. So this is the first movie, It, from 2017. And then in 2019, there's a follow-up, It Chapter 2, which is also quite good that I highly recommend. It Chapter 2. In fact, the two of these together would make for a very nice double feature if you're looking for a good double feature option. There's a couple of more options I'll talk about in that space, but It and It Chapter 2 would make for a very nice double feature. Speaking of a nice double feature, in 1980, Stanley Kubrick adapted another Stephen King novel for his movie The Shining, and 49 years later, another outstanding film came out directed by Michael Flanagan, or Mike Flanagan, who's the same director of Haunting of Hill House. And this is Stephen King's Dr. Sleep. So this is a follow-up to the original movie The Shining in 1980. And in this film, the adult Danny Torrance, who's the little boy in the Shining movie, he's an adult now in this film, and he is trying to save this little girl who has similar powers. He's trying to save her from Rebecca Ferguson, who is leading a band of supernatural people who have that same shining power. So it's just a really fascinating, interesting film in the Shining universe that really expands on the lore of the Shining universe. Whereas The Shining, the original film, left a lot of things mysterious. This film kind of expands on the universe of The Shining and helps explain some things and puts a little bit more meat on the bone of what's actually going on and what it means for people that shine. What does that mean? This movie explains that a little bit more and gives you some examples of what that's talking about. So this is a really nice film. It's a worthy follow-up to The Shining, and I highly recommend doing a double feature watching The Shining first and then watching Dr. Sleep, and you really get a great appreciation. I love Rebecca Ferguson in this. She plays a wonderful, wonderful character in this film. Ewan McGregor plays the adult Danny Torrance, and this young lady does a wonderful job. Her name is Kylie Curran. She plays the young girl in this film who has the special powers that Danny Torrance is trying to protect her from. Rebecca Ferguson, the Black Hat. And just a great film from director Mike Flanagan, director of Haunting of Hill House, Dr. Sleep. The next couple of films are films that are based on the true case files of the Warrens, and it's called The Conjuring and The Conjuring Part 2. So in these films, Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga play Ed and Lorraine Warren. They are paranormal investigators, and they basically investigate haunted houses. And this is a great horror film called The Conjuring that's based on those case files of the Warrens. And The Conjuring and The Conjuring Part 2 are both excellent films that I highly recommend. Another double feature opportunity. I know there's a Part 3, The Conjuring, I think Part 3, The Devil Made Me Do It. I have not seen that one yet, but I have seen these two. They are excellent, and I highly recommend checking out both of these films, especially the first Conjuring. Really, really good stuff from Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson. And the first one I know is directed by James Wan. Now the second one is Part 2 is directed by James Wan as well. So both of these films are James Wan directed vehicles, and I highly recommend them both, especially the first one. That's The Conjuring. Now, the next film is a film that is one of those films that if you haven't heard of, I highly, highly recommend that you check out this film because it's one of the most unique type horror films I've ever seen. And it came out, when did this film come out? It came out in 2014, and it's called It Follows. And this is a film by David Robert Mitchell. And this is just one of, it says on here, the best horror movie in over a decade. I would say this is definitely one of the best horror films that I've seen in the last 10 years. And it's just one of those weird kind of unique films in that it gives you a slightly different premise. Basically, you see this young lady, she has a sexual encounter near the beginning of this film, and ever since that happens, she feels that she's being followed by this supernatural force. It Follows is the title. And it's just one of those creepy, weird, crazy horror films that you absolutely must see for yourself. This is one of the best horror films that's come out in the last 10 years. And I highly recommend this film. It's from David Robert Mitchell. It's called It Follows, and it is one heck of a ride. Check out It Follows. The next film is from one of my favorite directors, Guillermo del Toro, and this is a film that stars several of my favorite actors as well, including Jessica Chastain and Tom Hiddleston, as well as Mia Wasikowska. I wanted to read that so I don't mispronounce her name. But this is a 19th century, horror, haunted house type mystery called Crimson Peak. So this is a really, really nice film. Stars Jessica Chastain. You got Tom Hiddleston in this. And this is a really nice gothic horror haunted house type film that's based in the 19th century. So this is a really nice horror film to check out from the master visionary Guillermo del Toro, and it's called Crimson Peak. So check this one out. Couple more left. Another film that I really, really enjoyed that is just one of those creepy type films that just keeps you on the edge of your seat from a suspense standpoint is a film called Don't Breathe. And this is directed by Fede Alvarez, a director I'm not that familiar with, but this is a wonderful, wonderful film. The stars Stephen Lang in this. You've got Jane Levy and Dylan Minnett. Basically, you've got this trio of young people who break into this house to steal this old man's stuff, but they end up breaking into the wrong house because they don't realize that this old man who's blind is a little bit more capable of taking care of himself than they give him credit for, and they get themselves in over their heads and basically don't breathe or he'll be able to find you. So this is a great horror, thriller, suspense type film you absolutely must check out. It's called Don't Breathe. This came out in 2016. Highly recommend this one. Check this one out. There's also a follow-up, Don't Breathe 2, that I believe recently came out. I haven't seen that one yet, but the first one is awesome. The next film is a film that stars ScarJo. Recently, she starred in Black Widow, of course. I have yet to pick up that 4K Ultra HD. I have yet to see the film. I've heard pretty good things about it, but this is a film from several years ago from her, from back in 2013, directed by Jonathan Glazer, and it's called Under the Skin. And in this film, Scarlett Johansson plays an alien from outer space. She basically seduces young men in Scotland, and they end up in this void zone, and she does crazy things to them. So this is just one of those creepy kind of horror films. It's very different. It has a very different story and premise than what a lot of horror films put out there, and it's just very different. It's a really interesting take on a horror film that I highly recommend. I'm not sure if this is a multiple watch type film, but it's definitely a film that you want to check out at least once, and it's called Under the Skin, starring Scarlett Johansson. Definitely check this one out. And then the last movie that I have on my list is one of my favorite horror films of the past 10 years and one of my favorite horror films of all time. This is a film that's directed by John Krasinski, and it stars both Emily Blunt and John Krasinski as a family in a post-apocalyptic world where you have to be quiet or else. And it's called A Quiet Place. This is a film that came out in 2018, and it is just an absolutely fantastic horror suspense thriller. Basically, the premise is this. A few years ago, aliens came to Earth in meteors. They crashed landed on Earth in meteors, and they are a race of aliens that are blind. They can't see, but they have super hearing, and they have nearly impenetrable bodies, and they're super strong, super fast, and they murder anything that makes noise. And the human race has been all but decimated around the world, and there's only a few pockets of humanity left. Emily Blunt and John Krasinski lead a family who are living in this post-apocalyptic world where people have to be quiet or the creatures will hear you and they will hunt you. So it is just one of those creepy movies that is just a movie you have to experience. Just the soundscape of this film is one of the most incredible parts of this film, and just the sound of silence is the scariest part of this film. It's just an incredible film starring Emily Blunt and John Krasinski. It's called A Quiet Place. A Quiet Place Part 2 also recently came out. I don't have that 4K Ultra HD yet. I look forward to picking that up probably on Black Friday. I plan to pick that one up pretty soon. So those are my recommendations for contemporary horror films. All right, so of these films that I've showed you, my top 3 of these films, my favorite films from the last 10 years in the horror category, have to be Get Out from Jordan Peele, It Follows. This is an incredible film I highly recommend, and A Quiet Place. So I love all of these horror titles from the last 10 years that I've shown you, but these 3 are by far my favorite of those films. And then as an honorable mention, I would also add to that Dr. Sleep. I think that is just an incredible follow-up to The Shining. Great film, highly recommended. But you can't go wrong with any of these titles. These are all amazing horror films that I think you will get incredible enjoyment out of if you check them out during this Halloween October season. So those are just some of my recommendations, but let me know in the comments below, what do you think about these films? Do you have a favorite among these films? And what are some other horror titles that you would recommend that I didn't even name? Let me know that in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time at the movies. Enjoy as many horror films as you can during this time of the year. Peace.